Hello, new and old Tenno alike. Today I'm going to be starting a series designed for new Tenno to complement my frame analysis series for the older ones. For example, in these videos, I will be going over simple things that new players aren't taught and may need to know, but for veterans, these would seem pointless, as they already know these things. My frame analysis and weapon analysis, when I get around to it, will go in greater detail and give a more in-depth aid for more specific things. Today's video I will be going over something that took me an embarrassing amount of time to actually comprehend, damage typing, and why it matters. Weapon damage is how a weapon or a frame would deal damage in a fight. Weapons have a common set of 3 damage types, which is commonly abbreviated as IPS, standing for Impact, Puncture, and Slash. These will add to your weapon's total damage and count as a status which can be applied to enemies for specific effects. Impact will cause the enemy to stagger for 1 second and increase the threshold they can be mercy killed by 4% per proc. This will stack 4 times, and it doesn't really do anything when it's applied to you, as yes, enemies can apply these statuses to you as well. Puncture will reduce damage dealt by the enemy by 30% for the first proc and 5% for subsequent procs, stacking up to 10 times for a maximum decrease in their damage of 75%. When this is applied to you, it only reduces your output by 30% and cannot be raised. Slash will cause a bleed for 35% of the base damage of the proc over 6 seconds time. This proc bypasses armor, and something unique to note, it is 35% of what caused the proc. For example, your sword hit will say 100 damage. That means that the target will bleed for 35 damage over 6 seconds. This effect can be stacked for multiple bleeds, and on player, a slash proc will deal 10% of the base damage over 6 seconds, which is also bypassing your armor. Those are the basic typings for damage, as most weapons will carry all 3 of these damage types in varying degrees. However, there are also 4 elemental typings that you can put onto a weapon, and some come baseline, such as the Sylva and Aegis for heat, or the Nucor for radiation. These 4 elements are heat, cold, toxin, and electricity. Heat deals 50% of the base damage as heat damage per second over 6 seconds, while causing the target to panic for 4 seconds and stripping 50% of the enemy's armor. What this means when it says 50% of the damage as heat damage is that certain enemies have resistances and weaknesses to certain elements. So if an enemy is weak to heat, they will actually take more than an enemy that resists it. This is true for every status in the game, so keep that in mind when you are building. Know your enemy and your build will be a little easier to complete. Anyway, on player, heat will deal 50% of the base damage as heat damage over 6 seconds, stripping 50% of your armor, but will not cause you to panic like it does on enemies. Cold reduces movement speed, fire rate, and attack speed for 6 seconds by 25%, with subsequent procs only adding 5%, stacking 10 times for a total of 70% all around slow. On players, this will reduce those same stats, except only for 25% for 6 seconds with no stack. Electricity deals 50% of the base damage as electricity damage per second over 6 seconds to all enemies within a 5-meter radius, and stuns the affected target for 3 seconds. On players, this will just do the bonus damage, however with no stun. And Toxin universally will deal 50% of the base damage as toxin damage per second for 6 seconds, bypassing the shield. Void is a new to the game or new-ish proc, and it can only be procced by players. On proc, it creates a 2.5 meter sphere around the point of the proc that will attract incoming projectiles such as bullets to the location for 3 seconds. Okay, you got all that? Good. Because now we're going to get into the fusion damage types. These are the damage types you get when modding and you put 2 different mods together that are different elements. For example, heat and toxin will create gas damage, whereas heat and cold will make blast damage. There are 6 of these archetypes, as 1 for each of the unique pairings, those being blast, corrosive, gas, magnetic, radiation, and viral. Blast damage reduces accuracy by 30% for 6 seconds, stacking up to 10 times with subsequent procs reducing the accuracy by 5% to create a total of 75%. On player, this only reduces your accuracy by the 30% for 6 seconds with no additional stack. Corrosive damage reduces armor by 26% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 10 times, with subsequent procs reducing the armor by 6% to create a total of 80%. And on player, the reduced armor is once again 26% for 8 seconds with no stack. Gas damage universally will deal 50% of its base damage as gas damage per second over 6 seconds in a 3 meter radius. This stacks up to 10 times, with subsequent procs increasing the radius by 0.3 meters to a total of 6 meters. Magnetic damage on enemies applies damage dealt to the shield increase of 100% and nullifies shield regeneration for 6 seconds. This will stack up to 10 times, with subsequent procs increasing the damage to shields by 25% to a total of 325% damage dealt to shields. And on a player, this amplifies the damage dealt to shields by 100%, it'll nullify shield regeneration, drain 50 energy per second from the player, and scrambles the player's UI for 4 seconds. Radiation on enemy forces them to attack any closest enemy and will be attacked in return, while dealing 100% additional damage to the allied units that he is attacking for 12 seconds. This will stack 10 times, with subsequent procs increasing the damage by 50% for a total of 550% increased damage to the units. On player hit, the wiki says it reduces firing accuracy and makes you able to be damaged by allies for 4 seconds. However, I've never been hit by an ally while I have a radiation proc, so I don't know how accurate that statement is. Viral damage on enemies amplifies damage dealt to health by 100% for 6 seconds. This stacks up to 10 times, with subsequent procs increasing the damage to health by 25% to a total of 325%. And even on players, that's a hefty amplification to health damage, as even though it's only 100% for 6 seconds, that's still a lot of increased damage to your health that you will be taking. Now, to a lot of newer players, that's a lot to handle, so I'll be putting a link to the wiki where I am getting a lot of this information from in the description for you guys to review if needed. I also bet you're probably curious as to why a weapon with so many elements seems to proc only 2 or 3 when there's 5 or something like that. That is boiled down to the equation that is used to determine what elements will proc based on their damage. Let's look at a weapon a lot of you newer Tenno are probably familiar with, the Skana. The Skana's spread of stats are 18 impact, 18 puncture, and 84 slash at base. The equation used to determine the likelihood of a proc is damage of whatever typing divided by the total damage of the weapon times 10. So, with that being said, our example of the Skana has a 15% chance to proc impact, 15% chance to proc puncture, and a 70% chance to proc slash, which is why you are probably seeing a lot more slash procs than you are anything else on your Skana. I would like to thank you all for coming, and I just want to add a little something funny about myself. I actually used to kind of loathe tutorials. I tend to play games and learn as I go, looking at things that happen in the game, and I don't like looking things up, or at least I didn't. I looked at it as almost a weakness to have to go to other people for help on something that you don't understand. I've changed my stance on that over the past year or so, as if you expect to learn everything just by playing, it's possible, but it's a monumental task, and you're sure to miss a couple of things in the process. For example, in writing this script and going over radiation, I had no idea about its effect on players being damaged by allies, because it had never happened to me. So things like that are why tutorials are important to really any game, and least of all Warframe, as there are so many systems that only veterans and players with a lot of hours would really understand or know. Anyway, with that out of the way, I would just like to say thank you again for watching until the end, and I hope to see you all in the next one.